everyone. It is 2:30 on the dot, so let's get into it. Welcome to the 6th episode of the Ethereum App Builders Roundtable. This series is a chance for app builders across the Ethereum ecosystem to connect with the broader community. It gives them a chance to share what they're working on and talk through any challenges that they're facing. And today I'm really excited for the focus of today's episode, which is DAOs. We'll be talking about how they're run, what's working, what still needs to be figured out, and what the future might look like. And so I'm really excited today to have a co-host with me, Theo from the Ethereum Foundation. I'll let him introduce himself in a bit, but I just want to say he's incredibly knowledgeable and passionate about DAOs. So I'm really happy to have him here with me. Theo, you want to introduce yourself and talk about maybe your DAO background?
Thanks. Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm very excited for this conversation today. I'm with the Ethereum Foundation, but previously I used to work in the DAO space. I was at VitaDAO governance lead, drafting their governance framework back in 2021. And I also worked with Safe as governance coordination lead with SafeDAO. And yeah, spent time with other DAOs like Genesis DAO back in the day, if anyone remembers that. So yeah, been following those for a while and still think about them a lot, even though I don't work directly on them at the Ethereum Foundation, and very glad to be here today.
Thanks, Theo. So a quick note on the format. Also, we have two other speakers up here with me, and before I get into their introductions, me and Theo do have some prepared questions that we're going to talk through with them. And then at the end, we'll open it up for questions from the audience. And if you do think of any questions, please request to speak, raise your hand, and I can let you up here once we get to that. But for now, we do have two amazing co-speakers up here. Let's start with Spencer from Hats. You want to introduce yourself?
Awesome. Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation to come be a part of this. Very excited to talk about DAOs in general, Hats Protocol, which is my project, and many other related things. So as a way of introduction, my name is Spencer. I'm one of the co-founders of Hats Protocol, and I've been around the DAO space now doing participating in DAOs, building tools and protocols and applications for DAOs, and doing a lot of thinking about sort of the theory and practice of DAOs, basically full-time now for 5 years. I started off, first DAO I ever joined was Raid Guild back in 2020, and then I started working on DAO House, which was sort of the platform that Raid Guild used to sort of operate its DAO, which was a Moloch DAO. Did that for a couple of years, and then sort of as part of that experience, all of the lovely things about DAOs and all of the not so lovely things about DAOs, and set out to try to address the not so lovely things while retaining the lovely things with a new project, which ended up being called Hats Protocol. So that's me, and excited to be here.
Thanks, Spencer. Ethan, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to be here. I am Yitong. I'm one of the co-founders of Agora. At Agora, we build governance tooling for top protocols. And I have been in the DAO space for a while now too, originally as the founder of a DAO called Vector DAO, and then eventually realized that we had so many problems that I was really excited to work on a structural level. So started Agora to work on those. So previous to this, I was at Coinbase for many, many years, working on the retail side of crypto, and super excited to be here.
Amazing. So let's get into it. Theo, you want to kick it off with the first question?
Totally. Yeah, so I think first it makes sense to just get a common understanding. What are we talking about here? And DAOs, the term is known to mean a lot, and people have rather different understandings. But I guess a good start here is for you both to just explain what each of your projects' take is on DAOs. So maybe Yutong, you want to start on Agora's interpretation of what you consider a DAO.
Yeah, DAO is sort of this like very confusing and overloaded term, and I'm glad we're starting here. A lot of things are DAOs, and a lot of things are DAOs that are not really autonomous or decentralized. And that's fine, right? I think we used the word DAO today as an umbrella term for a certain type of organization with a certain type of ideology. And the ideology is around sort of like doing things on chain in a decentralized way, in a as autonomous as possible way. But in practice, how many organizations are really doing that today? Not that many. It's really tough, right? In 2021, there was a lot of excitement in the space. We were all going to be DAOs. There was going to be golf DAO. There's going to be contributor DAOs. There's going to be protocol DAOs. But really, I think today, many of the remaining significant DAOs in operation are protocol DAOs. So these are folks who are engaged in token governance of token projects and protocols. And that is the primary demographic of organizations that we work with. We'd love to work with, frankly, a lot more than just that, but those are sort of the people today who have the deepest problems where there's economic interest that can build projects around. That's where we're starting with first.
Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. And Spencer, do you want to take the same question from Hat's perspective? So what is Hat's product offering for DAOs, and what's the definition you sort of associate with that?
I'm laughing because I could spend about 7 hours talking about what is and what is not a DAO. I like developed and published a whole framework a couple of years ago that to me was very helpful in thinking about this. Won't go into all the details of that here today, but fundamentally, I think I have a fairly narrow definition of what a DAO is relative to a lot of the projects that today and for the past number of years have called themselves DAOs. But I actually think that even within that narrow definition, the design space for what a DAO is and can be and the different forms that it can take is actually extremely large, larger even than the existing organizational structures within like traditional companies and organizations today. In fact, I think, at least conceptually, DAOs can be a superset of all organizational structures. And I think in the long run, DAOs will be far and away the best, most effective organizations that we have ever seen in like human society. We have lots of things to do to get to that point. As we'll talk about, there's lots of reasons today that that's not the case, but the ability to have distributed, decentralized ownership combined with flexible, programmable logic and structure and ability to tap into collective intelligence at the same time as having safe, concentrated responsibility to actually get things done according to all of that amazing collective intelligence is unprecedented. And we have yet to really like tap into that as a space, but that's coming, and that's what will turn our DAOs into the best organizations ever. And where Hats has a role to play in there, no pun intended, is by giving DAOs the ability to have safely concentrated responsibility while retaining distributed executive control, and by imbuing into their organizations, into their operations, programmable controls and eligibility criteria for who gets what powers, who gets what responsibilities, putting those into, like, embedding those into the organization. And that is another new capability that DAOs have that traditional organizations cannot touch. I will also say that it's not just DAOs that have those capabilities. It's any organization that wants to do its operations on chain. And so there is a blurred line, there is a spectrum from full DAO in the way I think about it to organization operating with smart contracts and the capabilities that they provide. And a lot of the governance tooling that all of us have been building and thinking about and working on over the years, including Hats, applies to those as well.
Great, awesome, yeah, touching on many great points. And I mean, the discussion of what defines a DAO, we're not gonna have, not to speak, conclude that today. But in my opinion, it serves a good purpose to have also a wider use of the term DAO, because it does spur up a debate of what is a DAO, and people think about governance and maybe become more opinionated and each work in their directions. Like, for example, at DEF CON in Bangkok, we had some presentations from Metagoth researchers from DAOstar who presented the state of DAOs in Singapore, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, which the reports are available online. And they make this point that there are cultural, social movements that call themselves DAOs, even if they're, some of them, not even on chain at all. They're just communities. But the term DAO for them stands as a movement of bringing about change, of coordinating, of a grassroots movement. And this is, like, I think, a good thing. I don't like that using the term DAO, though, because it really dilutes the term. But I'm just making the point here of that DAOs, the term is widely used, and we cannot come to a conclusion here. But at least we've sort of, agreed that there is no agreement. Right. So just to dive a bit more deeper into the state of DAOs today, I'm curious to hear from each of you. What are, like, misunderstandings of how DAOs operate day to day today? So how do DAOs actually work, and what do people assume that may not be the case? Spencer, do you want to start?
I think I'll if you don't mind, I'll change the question a little
Sure.
bit. I think one of the biggest misconceptions, following up a little bit with what I was saying just a minute ago, one of the biggest misconceptions about DAOs is less about how they actually work and more about how they can work. I think there's actually quite a lot of assumptions that the way they work today is what they are and how, like, that's how it is. And I think there's this sense that DAOs have to be this like everything in a DAO needs to be decentralized, including actually doing stuff, or that you can't put people in charge of things in a real durable or in a real empowering kind of way, and that also you have to, if you want to do that, then that can't be part of the DAO. That has to be like a service provider to the DAO. And service providers to DAO, to DAOs, that's great, and I don't want to say that shouldn't happen. In fact, I see eventually that being a very large part of how DAOs operate is by contracting with service providers. But I think there's a useful distinction between a service provider and somebody who is more embedded, or maybe a team that's more embedded in the organization and understands the context and has long-term incentive alignment with the DAO. And I think there's a lot of untapped, unexplored design space in having DAOs be actually larger organizations, like interior to themselves, not just as a result of hiring a bunch of external contractors. So I think the misconception that I would love to push back against is that DAOs can be DAOs can have many sort of like the equivalent to employees, but in a more flexible way. And as a result, you can have much greater long-term incentive alignment with those contributors, and much greater and consistent context that they are able to build up around what the DAO is doing, who's doing what, how the DAO operates, and what the goals are, and some of the challenges that previous iterations have run into. So I don't think DAOs need to be always this sort of like transactional kind of scenario with a very thin center and these transactional relationships on the core. I think they can be that the membrane can be much wider, and there can be much higher context, relationships, and operations within that membrane. And that's something that I really am excited to see more examples of.
That's interesting. Let me briefly follow up here. So when you talk about the membrane and sort of inside outside, how would you actually define these boundaries when you talk about DAOs? And do you have maybe some examples in mind?
So on one hand, within a DAO, or in the context of a DAO, the membrane is much more permeable than it is like in a traditional company, so to speak. On the other hand, it is valuable to have a membrane. It is valuable to have a distinction between who is in the organization and who is not. What I think is very powerful about DAOs is that you can define that based on who it has a share of control over the whole thing. Who has, in what the way many DAOs are structured today, who has tokens, who has in the Moloch DAO parlance, who has shares. I see DAO House in the audience. Who has shares? Who has a portion of the executive control? To me, that is the right way to think about who's a member of the DAO, who has real, strong, credible incentive alignment with the rest of the people in the organization. That there's other answers, and that's not the only one, but that's the strongest in my view.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Yitong, what's your take on this?
I love everything that Spencer says, and I actually am a big fan of hats. And I think what Spencer's too polite to say is that this is exactly the problem that hats is solving for. So let me shield him and his product a little bit, which is that you're right? We should have these flexible permission systems. They should have the right level of permanence for the right level of roles. And I think this is sort of like maybe a realization that I think this generation of DAO builders have all sort of like come to realize, which is that, like maximum, there is no maximum decentralization is not optimal decentralization. And so there's sort of this like there was this very simple more is better mentality to a lot of the early thinking in the DAO space. And I think the simple but stupid truth that I think a lot of people are now coming to is that like actually better is better. Let's sort of focus on better decision making, better outcomes, as opposed to more decentralization for the sake of decentralization. We should have the right level of decentralization for what we're trying to achieve. And so I think maybe to answer your other question as a corollary, which is like, what is a common misconception, is that like from our perspective, we're sort of like a very applied team and we work with a lot of projects. And one thing that we frequently hear when we are early in the process of onboarding a community to Agora is, how do I combat voter apathy? And I think there's sort of this like meme that like, yes, there's a lot of voter apathy in DAOs, and that's a big problem. And I think the thing that I frequently push back on is like, look, there are some DAOs where literally nobody is doing anything, and that's a problem. But voter apathy, like more voting isn't necessarily better, right? And so this is kind of like maybe to Spencer's point too, is that like the right people at the right places with the right control structures and the right accountability mechanism, producing better decisions and outcomes is better. And so I think you frequently see these sort of like harebrained schemes to produce more votes. And you can certainly produce more votes. It's not hard to produce more votes. The bots would love you for giving incentives to produce more votes, right? There are people who will run bot farms producing votes all day long, but that's not producing better decentralized decision making. And that's what we are ultimately in the business of solving, all of us here, is to actually produce functional and superior DAOs than traditional organizations.
That's a brilliant point. Yeah, and thanks for bringing up on that point of maximum decentralization is much better decentralization. I'm not sure I agree entirely, but of course, better is highly subjective, and we could also spend, I guess, week-long workshops on that. But I guess a meta discussion that may also be interesting to the audience is like, what are metrics? What are metrics we can use to measure, quote unquote, a good DAO, what it is? And how do you take that in your organizations or maybe with your users? And of course, we've seen various dashboards, like DeepDAO is quite known for their analytics, and projects like Optimism have their own dashboards, many other DAOs as well. But these are, of course, often quantitative. And as you rightfully said, that can be gained so easily, and to a point where it's maybe not meaningful at all and maybe even confusing to talk about numbers, because there's this phenomenon, I'm missing the term, but once you set a goal, you game it, and then it becomes meaningless. So what's each of your takes on metrics, and maybe slight preview? Do we need qualitative metrics, and how do we get them? How do we get there? Who wants to start?
I guess I can start. You're probably referring to Goodhart's law there at the end,
right?
Theo, and which is a big challenge. It's like a really big challenge, especially when we financialize the measurement itself, like we do with tokens. Then we get crazy, crazy gaming, crazy stuff. I don't think we have the right metrics yet, and I don't think there are, at least what I have seen. I don't think we have like great dashboards or sort of industry-wide standards or even ideas for how to measure the good DAOs, or like demonstrate that a particular DAO is good in some way. I think we need, and a number of people have said this. This is definitely not my novel idea, but I support it fully. We need to, as a community, as an ecosystem, as an industry, we need like the equivalent of L2 Beat, but for DAOs. We need to sort of come to a collective understanding about what are the important, not necessarily metrics, but the important things to measure about DAOs. And my high level perspective here is that sort of the things that we care about for companies are, one, how well do they achieve their goals, and like what is the return basically, and two, how cheaply can they do that? Like how much do you have to invest in order for that to happen? And those are like the two high level things that we care about when it comes to companies. And there's of course many sub things to care about with each of those, and predictive or sort of like both trailing and leading metrics that help understand both of those. With DAOs, we have a third pillar, which is security, or resistance to capture, both from internal capture and from external capture. Unlike companies, DAOs don't rely on legal systems to support them basically in everything that they're doing. And so they need to also be resistant to capture by outsiders, by DAO raiders, by overly activist, misaligned token acquirers, et cetera, et cetera. And so we get this third challenge of being effectively marshaling our resources towards accomplishing our goals, while also protecting those resources from capture, while also spending as few as we possibly of those resources as we can on the achievement of our goals. So I would posit that those are the three pillars that we need to be thinking about. And the hardest one still is the capture resistance or security pillar. That is what DAOs are really great at, but it's also what we are still exploring the design space for how that actually works.
I'll plus one a lot of what you said, Spencer. I maybe to make things even more slightly more controversial, I think we kind of know how to measure these things. And this the fact that you and I and many of the people that we work with have like floated this idea of L2 Beat for DAOs is because I think we all have this intuition that it is possible to measure some of this stuff, and that's why we all want this project to happen. And I think I'll echo a lot of the stuff that you say, which is that like, look, every organization has different goals, and every goal because you have different goals, I suspected that the primary objective and primary metric for every organization will be different. That's just normal organization stuff. But I think most of these DAOs, especially if you define DAO slightly more narrowly as sort of some of these protocol DAOs, have a very common shared objectives, right? And it's exactly like a lot of things that you said, which is A, how well are we accomplishing our primary objective? B, are we being effective and efficient in accomplishing that? So how much resource are we consuming? And three, are we doing it in a manner that is consistent with some of the values that we care about, which frequently will sound like capture resistance, will sound like long-term, like long-termism. And these things are eminently measurable, right? So I think capture resistance, for example, is sort of this very simple. You can have simple approximations, and they're certainly not perfect, but you can certainly get to like a 70%, 80% correct answer on some of this stuff, which is like, hey, probably every protocol should have, somewhere how much does it cost to buy up 51% of the votable supply of votes to pass any proposal. And if 51% of the votes are actually bought and forced into a proposal, is there a fail-safe mechanism? And who hosts the fail-safe mechanism? Who are the people who can veto? And like, is there a relatively neutral and well-dispersed group of people who can veto? And are they actually going to be able to reach their keys in time? There are sort of a lot of very technocratic things that we can start measuring, and they're not going to be perfect, but they can get us pretty far. And I do think that as an industry, we owe it to ourselves to sort of start pushing for some level of like, it's almost like, I hate to kind of sound so corporate, but like companies have this, right? It's SOC 2. Like, this is why everybody laughs at SOC 2. Nobody likes SOC 2. It's very enterprisey, but these are sort of just like, hey, if you want to be a serious business, you want to have the right control structures in place so that we know that if we, collaborate with you, you're not going to suddenly rug us one day. And so we should have some kind of standard like that for on-chain organizations and on-chain protocols too, some sort of DAO beat, if you will. So I personally am bullish metrics and think that we can get there. We just need somebody to pick up that mantle.
Yeah, these are great points, and there's definitely a conversation to be had here. Curious to hear who are these people that have been working or suggesting that, but yeah, we can take that async. I want to follow up with a brief question, and then I think we'll expand the stage to make this a bit of a fishbowl. But just briefly to touch on that, L2Bs for DAOs, what do you think is needed to get that happen? Like, why is that blocked in any ways? And if it's not blocked, what would be very helpful? And of course, this is also like a space hosted by the Ethereum Foundation. Do you see any role the Ethereum Foundation could play here? Not to promise anything, but like just discussing what would help to get this kickstarted.
I actually think it has to be the Ethereum Foundation. Well, maybe not has to be, but I think the Ethereum Foundation has a really valuable role to play in doing something like this, and it's really down to legitimacy. There is no other organization that sits in and represents the ecosystem, and that does not have like a financial stake in exactly how this DAO beat ends up being designed. One of the challenges, like the Goodhart challenge, is a little bit scary when it comes to something like this, because there are different protocols that provide different tools, or different applications that provide different tools that would, from a selfish perspective, they would love to like have DAO beat say you have to use the thing that they provide in order to be considered like a stage 2 DAO or whatever. And we definitely don't want that kind of sort of informal regulatory capture to happen. And I think those organizations like can't be the ones that start DAO beat themselves. It needs to be something. It needs to come from a neutral place. There are probably some teams that are doing like sort of broader, not product or application or protocol work that can occupy that neutral space. But I think the Ethereum Foundation is the most likely to be successful at doing so, and also probably has the most resources that they can bring to bear to funding this sort of thing.
I had 1,100 emojis for Spencer. I feel the same way. And let me push this a little bit further, which is to say that I think there were a couple of critical factors to bootstrap L2B. One is that one legendary blog post, forum post from Vitalik that outlined the stages, which created the initial legitimacy conditions for this to exist. And two is sort of like funding, right? Like there's not a really clear business model for L2Beat. And frankly, ideally, the business of L2B isn't actual L2 sponsorship. That would be pretty bad. That would be a misaligned incentive. And so I think the fact that Ethereum Foundation is a large source of funding for L2B is also very good. So ideally, those two conditions are also true for something like a DAO-B. The other thing that I will add is sort of maybe a pitch for the EF, which is that there's been mounting pressure over the last couple of months for the EF to play a more active role in sort of like ecosystem and community development. And I think there's also been this constraint from the EF, from just reading from the outside, of wanting to maintain credible neutrality and not like king making certain protocols versus others. And I think the EF spelling out the values and spelling out sort of like the metrics by which we determine an application to be like, the kind of application we want to see in Ethereum. Not to say that EF should get in the game of saying we want lending protocols versus that, but rather like, hey, any protocol or any organization that we want to see on Ethereum should have these properties. Otherwise, why bother? Right? That's a little strong, but like otherwise, these are not the kind of apps and values that we want to champion. And being able to say that is a great opportunity to like align organizations towards, hey, if we want to get tweeted about and sort of promote it and highlight it by Ethereum, we should sort of aim towards having these properties that we know are sort of like aligned with the ethos of Ethereum. And like also, like, I think it's like a way for Ethereum to do community development and ecosystem development in like a culture aligned way. So I think there's a lot of wins around the table for everyone here, and y'all should definitely think about it.
Comment noted. So moving on here, we have the first member of the community that's brought up to the stage. Welcome, Cup of Joseph. I'm curious to hear from you. Just give a brief intro, and then what do you think good governance actually looks like in practice?
Sure. I'm Joseph. I'm a DeFi developer. I'm working on Neurite, which is a new stablecoin on Arbitrum right now. And I'm also on a city council in the city that I live in Virginia. So I've done a lot of work on Metacartel for about 5 or 6 years, Raid Guild, and some early DAOs like that. But I've also done a lot of work in local governance in the city that I live in on housing issues, on transportation, and just local community stuff. So I think there's a lot that I've learned in local politics, not really as a politician, but just organizing communities and budgets and stuff that I've brought to DAOs, and likewise vice versa. So yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me up. And I have some questions for Spencer, but I can answer anything too.
Awesome.
First, I'd be interested to hear more about what is exactly those policies that you've seen in local governments that you're bringing to the DAO space.
Yeah, so one of them is that sometimes we like to have spaces where we hear from everybody and we make sure that everybody's opinions are heard and everybody gets input. And something that I don't see always balanced so well in DAOs is if someone is going to vote against you, then you should not compromise with them, right? And we have different types of compromises that are made in different types of DAOs. And there are some where the DAO is totally 100% anonymous and no one knows each other, and all the proposals are completely automated, like Curve or Convex, right? And everything is just run completely autonomously. That's the A in DAO. And those work fundamentally differently from DAOs like Optimism or Arbitrum, where there's actual human beings that have to interface with each other. So I think understanding who is voting and what are their incentives is really important. Another one that has happened to me kind of recently locally is like making favors for different people. And I was recently betrayed on the city council when I was applying for a planning commission position, and the mayor betrayed me, and there's a lot of drama, right? And I've found in a lot of DAOs, sometimes people just keep discussing things for the sake of discussing, and getting to like the actual heart of what you want to accomplish can be really challenging because of that. So I guess those two things are not super related. But if you want to succeed in DAOs, I guess the like kernel of truth or something interesting that I would put out is just go and make a proposal, and don't be scared about who is going to approve or let you do something. Or the cool thing about DAOs is that you don't actually have to ask for permission. Arbitrum DAO probably has the most resources of any DAO. Maybe Optimism is close, but like you can just show up and just start making proposals. And with local politics, or your local government, you can't necessarily do that. There's like processes or gatekeepers or whatever. But if you just show up to Raid Guild and you start building stuff, you become a DAO member at Raid Guild. You can just show up to Ethereum and start working on Ethereum, and that's really a huge revolution in governance that I don't think people in the world have really realized yet. So yeah, like local government stuff could learn a lot from removing gatekeepers and letting more people just kind of show up and start doing stuff.
Yeah.
I once painted an illegal bike lane in my city, and we do like guerrilla urbanism, and we just don't ask permission and just go out and build stuff. So there's that. But there's also a lot of things that people designing DAOs maybe on this call could learn from local governance or existing government structures. Congressmen, for example, have a 2-year, in the US, have a 2-year cycle, right? So you get reelected every 2 years. All the largest delegates on Arbitrum and Optimism and a lot of other of the most powerful DAOs basically are going to be the largest delegates forever because of other stagnation things that, Spencer already kind of talked about earlier. So, maybe designing decay functions into delegation is something that we should work on. I feel like I just talked for a really long time. So
whoa, but thanks.
That's what I have on that.
You did mention a lot of great points, and I really love the analogy to these local city governments. And I do think the DAO space can learn a lot from like the real world, quote unquote, and also like human history of coordination and governance out there. Because did you know that humans coordinated before DAOs? That actually happened, and we have so much to learn from.
Oh my God, shocking.
And cooperatives.
Really?
Cooperatives have such a long history of coordinating with similar goals in mind, actually, and so many other disciplines. And one thing I'd like to dig into here out of the many points was sort of the deliberation process. So DAOs are all about voting, or they used to be. But before you come to a vote, you make up your mind. You have an informed discussion, hopefully. You talk to others. You become informed. And research has shown that the deliberation process, so the part before where you make up your mind and before you go to the voting stage, that is very underdeveloped. And as you also said, I mean, it is true that the barriers are low. You can go in the forum and just post, but then do people read it? Do people pay attention, or is it even considered? I mean, we've seen DAOs where people just put up proposals as a formality, but actually in some back room, the deal has already been made. So how do we get to the place where we have an actual informed, like people have informed opinions and have a chance to coordinate online, which is really hard in this anonymous global setting of pseudonymous avatars talking 24/7 on the internet. So I guess this is more of an open-ended question, but maybe to Yitong and Spencer, who wants to start first? What's your thought on this deliberation process before it gets to a vote?
I think it would be really great if we could have more of that. I think one of the things that you mentioned was that there's like these backroom deals that are made that then sort of get like ratified by the whales in a ostensibly open proposal process, and that's not really good. I think we can all agree on that. But I think one of the reasons that happens is that it's very difficult to have a conversation, to have an actual deliberative conversation as a full community. And so people who like want to do something and provide value to the DAO end up feeling very stymied by the noise that exists in the open, permissionless, quote unquote, conversation. And so they kind of, this is very much rhymes with the tyranny of structuralistness, which is that if we don't have good ways of defining what the community space is and we just leave it open and open-endedly open, then what happens is we get like shadow structures and we get backroom deals, because that's the only way to actually really get something done and cut through the noise. So I don't think we're ever going to be able to have community deliberation unless we're able to manage the noise, which is a very, very challenging problem. Maybe AI can help us somehow, some way there, or like contain the noise or block out the noise in, or create containers that are less noisy. And this is maybe a controversial thing, because DAOs have, as Joe was speaking to so well, one of the beautiful things about DAOs is that participation can be permissionless, but permissionlessness is not cost free for a DAO. Every new person that comes to speak consumes the attention of the collective, and we need ways of managing that. The attention of the collective is a shared resource of the DAO, and that is not something to just give away for free to everybody. That ends in disaster. So we need ways of filtering the conversation, of creating rooms and containers for people to deliberate in without being drowned out by noise. But of course, we also have to figure out a way to do that in a way that doesn't just exclude people arbitrarily. So that's a very, very challenging problem. But I do think that there are and will be ways to create the types of dynamic, meritocratic filters to create those containers. And using hats, I think, might actually be a very interesting way to explore that. And would love to talk more about that at some other point. But that's actually, I think, is one of the fundamental problems today with DAOs, is they're too open in a lot of ways, and that creates, ironically, closed operations.
Yeah, I was going to say something relatively similar, which is that it's not bad. Like, backroom deals aren't inherently bad, right? There are some decisions that ought to be made in a smaller group than a larger group.
I love backroom deals when they benefit me, and I hate them when they benefit anybody who's not me.
Yeah, I think that's probably, that's I certainly align with the joke there, but it's sort of like there is a time.
No, it's 100% true.
Yeah, there is a time and place for having private decisions with a smaller group of people. But I think it's different when a process is made out to be an open caucus, but is in practice a private decision, right? So I think, similar to what Spencer is saying, is that, like, if we can delineate what is and is not an open process and actually stop pretending like everything is an open process, I think it makes the open process more manageable. Right? There are rooms that, sorry, you are just not in. If you want to be in that room, you have to run through a different process to be in that room. And then you don't feel bad for not being in that room, because there probably should be rooms. It doesn't make any sense for us not to have any private rooms. So then I think for me, it's sort of this, I think we have to own up to the fact that rooms are acceptable, and then find a fair way for the right people to be able to get to the right rooms. And once you're in this rooms, have private caucus, do the back room. That's okay. Right. But the way that we have things now is sort of this, haha, everything is open, but not really. You're not in the right rooms. There are secret rooms that we don't talk about. And that's just silly. We can get to a place where we're adults about this kind of stuff, have this openness, have the meritocracy that we want, but also have different levels of control structure. That is fine.
Yeah, that's great. Certainly a long way to go, but I would actually like to open the floor for a few short questions in a bit. I'll have one more question, but if anyone would like to speak up, please think of a question and raise your hand in a couple of minutes. Just a heads up for now. But for now, one more question I'm curious about is, do you like, how do we move forward from here? Like, what does the DAO space need in terms of improvement? We've already talked about the sort of L2Bs for DAOs, which would be sort of a norm setting, like a clarifying the values. Is there, besides that, I guess some sort of a technical barrier, for example, something you would like to let the Ethereum Foundation know that sort of concerns lower level infrastructure bottlenecks, or some other technical barriers, or is it more less technical issues that you've observed being a barrier in practice? Don't know if anyone.
I've had a similar conversation in sorry, go. Yeah,
No,
were
no.
you gonna say an order?
No, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I'll just make this one quick then. I think for DAOs, the good thing about DAOs is that we actually don't require super high throughput transactions. So, I think scaling, obviously more scaling, better scaling, always better. But I think that we are not currently at this point blocked on scaling as a factor for DAOs. And I think I would just come back to a lot of the norm setting that you guys have mentioned when it comes to Ethereum. And I think the other thing that we probably could use a little bit of, and this is not an Ethereum specific thing, is just more regulatory clarity around sort of like, hey, can you just kind of commit crime on chain? Is that kind of just like a legal thing now? Or do we have proper definitions of what is a acceptable like token structure? What is a acceptable control structure for a protocol, and what kinds of organizations do you have to set up in the back end for these kind of things? So I very much think that DAOs has been always continues to be and always will be a socially limited problem, with of course assists possible from the technical side.
Right. Plus one to basically everything that Yitong said there. I'll add that, which is sort of related to the scaling question. First of all, I agree that we're at the point where additional scaling is not really going to move the needle for what DAOs can do. We're no longer in the 100 or more Gwei gas environment trying to spend $15 to vote on mainnet. That's not really happening anymore. What is a limiting factor is that, DAOs are just like companies. They are businesses and organizations that operate in the economy. And what it means to operate in the economy is to be able to connect to the entire economy in one way or another. And when we have our Ethereum economy fragmented as it is today, it's getting better, and there's stuff in the works to help with that. But when it's fragmented as it is today, it makes it very hard for collective participants in the economy, which are DAOs, to operate in all the places that they need to operate. And it creates all these weird centralization points where they have to rely on off-chain kind of actors to literally bridge the gap between the different chains and L2s that DAOs are on. So, and that's particularly challenging for protocols and applications that are trying to provide new capabilities, tools, technology to DAOs, when they have to repeat everything that they're doing on all the chains that DAO or L2s, et cetera, that DAOs are on. Jason and I talked about this at some point previously, but this is a pain point for me and for the Hatch protocol team. Quite strong one, and it's only going to get worse unless it gets better. So that is interoperability, composability across chains is of critical importance, I think, both to me as an individual, to me as a representative of my project, and to the DAO space as a whole.
Nice. Yeah, totally. To the audience, please request to speak if you have a question, but I will add one more in the meantime. Following up on what we just said, Spencer, so I've talked to a couple of engineers throughout my I guess now 7 years in DAOs, and some people literally said like, "Oh, I'm so glad we have on-chain governance now, so we don't need humans to coordinate anymore. We can just get rid of this annoying human element and just automatize governance and decision making." So yeah, I wish it was that easy. But I guess what I wanted to get at is that DAOs are not that much of like an attractive topic if you are an engineer, if you like mathematical proofs, and if you like logical and rational decision making, because humans are not often, right? So how do we make DAOs more interesting to someone who says like, I like layer one governance to some extent. I even prefer layer one, like, technology and those base layer infrastructure. But DAOs, those social governance things, I don't care. Like, what would you respond to them? Why should people care about the higher level of the stack and their governance? Why does decentralized governance on those level matter to Ethereum? Does anyone want to start to take that?
I could try to do this quickly, but I have many thoughts on this topic. So I'll just do something hopefully very quick. I think for developers, for engineers, decentralized governance of applications and application layer protocols is critical for reducing or to reduce platform risk for you, an engineer, a developer building applications that relate to, compose with, interoperate with, or build on top of those other protocols. Just like L1 needs to be credibly neutral, every other part of the stack needs to be as credibly neutral as possible, so that people don't, engineers, developers that are building on top of it, don't have to take on additional risk, or the risk that they take on is minimized. But of course, governing something that is alive, that is changing, that is evolving, that is growing with the times and with improving technology is a non-deterministic question. And so therefore it has to be somewhat subjective and somewhat social in nature. I would also, I got one more thing, and then I'll let somebody else, like I think Joe's got his hand up, speak. There is a ton of mechanistic, amazing mechanistic, and like maybe even financially based mechanisms to build in the DAO space that support the subjective social governance. And so there's a ton of opportunity.
Nice, thanks. Yeah, Joe?
Okay. So basically, the working class of the world has been organizing themselves into guilds and cooperatives and those type of community structures for thousands of years as a way to come together, bring their skills together, and compete with the feudal lords when there were guilds thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, capital interests and corporations today, because workers are really strong together. And those organizations like co-ops, I've worked for farming co-ops before. It's very hard to fundraise. It's very hard to raise money. If you're a corporation, it's very easy to raise money, right? And cooperative structures of people working together in communities have failed to benefit from the economics of scale, or really just the legal structures that make it hard for individuals to build organizations that are very good at fundraising and very good at distributing rewards efficiently. DAOs are really, really good because they're on chain, and we can program money now with Ethereum smart contracts, right? We have programmable money. So with DAOs, it's really, really easy to fundraise. It's really, really easy to distribute rewards efficiently, fairly, with a tiny, tiny fraction of the overhead required to, have a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange. You have to spend millions of dollars in legal overhead to have a publicly traded company that can pay out dividends, right? But I could spin that up in a DAO in a smart contract in about 5 minutes, right? And so these are new organizational structures that give power to groups of people who have been disenfranchised for thousands of years. And it's giving us a way to work together and compete with other larger capital interests. To me, that is super important. That is like absolutely worth pursuing, and that is why DAOs matter. And these type of experiments that we're doing in governance actually really matter for the future of humanity. So keep experimenting, try out hats, and build absolutely new organization structures that have never been able to exist or never existed before. And yeah, let's do it. So thanks. That's for me.
Nice. Yeah, great points. And also a shout out, you mentioned collectives, a shout out to the Argo collective, which is the latest spin out of the EF with Solidity, Sourcify, and a couple of other teams in-house. So they chose a collective as their way of governing themselves, a democratic worker collective, which is awesome to see. And just one of many, many ways to govern ourselves in the space. But yeah, Yutong, did you want to add something to that too? Otherwise, I have some other questions.
Yeah, I'll just wrap it up real quick by saying that I agree with a lot of the philosophical and moral reasons. But I think practically, maybe to leave on a very boring note, is that look, I think we came to Ethereum to build immutable software, and it turns out most software is mutable, and so we have no choice but to learn to govern our mutable software. And so whether you like it or not, as a developer and as anyone in the ecosystem, we just have to get good at governing mutable software. That's okay. That's just part of the job.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, we all learn, and we have so many experiments going on in the crypto space, from cryptos, from Bitcoin's absence of governance, which is still a form of governance. You cannot have not governance. I guess many learn that, but I'm also not an expert here and open to continuing that conversation elsewhere. But we're almost at time, and I guess just to wrap this up, any closing words from each of you? And I guess if you don't have any particular statement, I would be curious to hear what's your hope for the DAO space, the DAO mechanism, the governance mechanism, R&D, and sort of related subjects for the coming 5 years? What are sort of the big problems we need to tackle if we take a step back and think big? What do you wish for that deserves more attention and that we should work on in the coming 5 years? Who wants to start?
I wish for everybody on this call to try out Hats Protocol to launch their own DAO with cool new structures and permissions and all the stuff that Spencer is working on. And I wish for DAOs to have 10 more Constitution DAO moments where we're taking over the public zeitgeist and doing something cool that you can't do without DAOs. And thanks for having me on. Check out Neurite. Yeah, thanks.
Great. Yeah, and I guess this space is a no-shill space. So yeah, Hats is great. So is Agora and Aragon and Colony and DAO and all these
no
other
shill,
tools
no shill. I'm sorry.
Great.
Yes. yes, all of them. Yes, 100%.
Nice. Spencer?
Well, thanks for the shout out, Joe. Appreciate it. I will leave. I think I'll say this. One of the great joys for me about working on Hats Protocol is that it is like embarrassingly reliant on other projects in the DAO space. It doesn't really work. It doesn't even make sense without other projects in the DAO space. And to me, that's really nice because I get to work with a bunch of amazing, awesome people like Yitong and many others. And that's really fun and satisfying. But it's also, to me, the way that DAO should work, right? All of this stuff should work together and compose together and interoperate. And what I wish for the DAO space is more of that, more leaning into building tools that extend what is possible and compose with what already exists, so that we all grow and improve together, and so that we all build the economy that we want together in the way that is sustainable and where the equilibrium is that we all win together.
I love that.
Awesome.
Theo, sorry, I feel like I cut you off.
No, I just wanted to say the very same thing. Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I maybe just to like pile on here a little bit. I really appreciate everybody who, in this day and age are still in the trenches with all of us working on DAOs. It is not easy. We've had, several boom and bust cycles, and we're out here still, I think, pursuing this niche stream that all of us believe to be incredibly important. And I have one wish for all of us, which is to find a sustainable business model that keeps us working on this problem for a long, long time. Because I don't think it's going to be easy. I think we're going to be here for a decade. Because the mission is so large, and I think sometimes like we forget to take a step back and just actually evaluate what we were trying to do here and the changes that we're trying to affect. And it's enormous, right? If we did it in a decade, it would be shockingly fast. And so we need to be able to be here for that long, right? And so I know that it's kind of hard to build in the DAO space, and I wish this for all of us to find sustainability and to be here in 10 years still doing this space.
That's really, really well said. Yeah, the no strings attached funding for honest governance mechanism that don't serve anything but decentralized governance. That really is a tough one because we have so many influences and interests, and governance is, if it's about giving away power, that is a tough one. You need to be quite idealistic, but we've been trying for many years and we'll keep trying, and it's really awesome to hear what you guys are all pushing hard here. I think this might be a good time to call it a day. It's getting late here in Europe, and we have covered a lot of topics. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining. I really loved this discussion, and there's much more to talk about. But for today, I think this is good. Handing over to Jason.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. A special shout out to Theo. Thank you for being the guest host here. You were amazing. And also, obviously, shout out Yitong, everything you're doing at Agora, Joseph, DeFi, DAO, all of it. Spencer, Hats. We love all of you guys. Love everyone in the Ethereum community. This space was recorded, and I'm super excited to listen to it again because this was absolutely amazing, and I want to make sure I took in all the knowledge that you guys were blessed us with. And yeah, so I'm really excited for the next call as well. So this will wrap up Ethereum App Builders Roundtable number 6. Hope you all have a good one.
Thank you. Good being here.
Thank you, everyone.